This is a film about an exciting 2-week Arctic rafting adventure down the remote Firth River to the ice-covered Arctic Ocean. In part 2, we continue on down the river through a seemingly never-ending series of rapids, which makes for an entertaining ride. Along the way, we have excellent sightings of Dall sheep and caribou crossing the Firth. In the morning, we rafted on to the Red Hills campsite where we'd spend 2 days. Again, the river was a seemingly endless series of rapids, which made for an entertaining ride. Along the way, we had excellent sightings of Dall sheep and caribou crossing the Firth.
Hey, are you doing on purpose?
There were still some snowbanks along the river, fighting a losing battle to survive the effects of the endless Arctic summer sun. As we rounded a bend on the Firth River, a flock of Dall sheep was spied up on a steep cliff ahead. We eddied out and climbed up higher to better see the sheep. The cliff where the sheep were moving about on was impressively steep with lots of loose rocks. In May and early June, pregnant ewes head for the steep cliffs of the lambing grounds. After they have had their lambs, the ewes and their lambs join together to form nursery groups. After 3 or 4 weeks, when all the ewes have lambed, the sheep move towards their summer range higher up in the alpine regions as the snow melts and the green shoots sprout. As it was late spring, the ewes were still shedding their warm winter fur coats, which can be over 2 inches or 5 centimeters thick. During the gold rush years, sheep populations were nearly wiped out from the demand for their meat to feed the new settlements. Later, road crews building highways also greatly decreased the number of sheep. Today, sheep numbers have recovered through protection and management considerations, although not to their original numbers. With their remarkable muscle tone, balance, and coordination, Dall sheep demonstrate how well they have adapted to living on rock faces as they frolic and cavort about in situations humans try to avoid. Often it will take a human significantly longer to cover a vertical climb that it only took a few seconds for the sheep to scale. Dall sheep are remarkably strong and have endurance that allows them the energy and stamina to evade predators such as wolves and bears on the uneven ground and precarious mountain slopes they call home. Young lambs are a popular target for migrating golden eagles arriving in the spring season from their overwinter habitats, so sheep must be watching in all directions for potential dangers that could impact them or their offspring. Before the ewes laid down to rest for a while, they used their hooves to clear off any loose rocks that would stick into them when they laid down. Fortunately for them, Dall sheep have superior eyesight for distance and low light level conditions. They have horizontal pupils that help them to see panoramically to detect predators that could approach them from any direction. They also need to be able to see forward clearly so that they can run over the rough terrain. They have excellent peripheral vision and can even see behind themselves without having to turn their heads due to where their eyes are located on their skull. Occasionally, the sheep would trigger a rock slide as they moved across the cliffside. However, this didn't appear to faze them in any way. Unlike caribou, which drop their antlers annually, Dall sheep have one set of horns from shortly after birth that continue to grow over their lifespan, which averages 14 years. Males have thick horns that grow larger and spiral with age, while female horns remain small and slender. There were a couple of monoliths on the river that reminded me of something out of Lord of the Rings. We stopped before the Class 4 Sheep Slot Rapids to walk around them, as again the guides would take the rafts through them without passengers. This time the guides suited up in dry suits before they ran the Class 4 rapids. Nearing the Red Hills campsite, we passed by a huge anticline that resulted from an enormous folding force on the Earth's crust. At the Red Hills campsite, I camped on the rocky shore to get a little relief from the mosquitoes infesting the shelter of the forest. The campsite had some remnants left behind by gold placers who used to fly in for placer mining. Since we were at the campsite for 2 days, we had the opportunity to make a long hike up the mountain to see the tors. The Firth River in Ivavik National Park is the oldest flowing river in Canada, as the area was never glaciated. It is but one of many frigid Arctic rivers that caribou must cross on their annual migration. We were lucky to have had an excellent view of a group of migratory caribou as they approached the Firth River, which they had to cross on their great circular Arctic migration route. The small herds that we were watching pass by are part of the much larger Porcupine caribou herd, which is a migratory caribou herd named after the major river in their range, namely the Porcupine River. They migrate over 2,400 kilometers a year between their winter range and the calving grounds, which are mainly in the 1002 area of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. This is the largest land migration route of any land mammal on Earth. Over the decades, the porcupine caribou herd size has varied between 100,000 and 200,000 animals. Currently, it is at the upper end of that range. The group was led by 3 bull caribou with huge racks of antlers. Caribou sport the biggest antlers compared to body size and are the sole deer with both sexes thus equipped. The caribou cascaded down from the bench towards the riverbank like a fast-flowing stream of water. For a bull, their antlers are a graphic demonstration to females of the bull's health, ability to mobilize nutrients and avoid predation, thus a measure of his vibrancy and value as a sire of many caribou calves. Bulls use antlers in the rut for fighting with other males, and they then drop them as soon as the rut is over. A caribou bull weighs about 325 pounds or 160 kilograms. They start with a bare forehead every spring, and in less than 120 days, they grow a complete set of antlers that weigh as much as 35 pounds, or 10% of their body weight. Caribou cows grow antlers as well, but their antlers are much smaller than the ones the bulls grow, as they don't need them for attracting mates. Rather, they need them to fight at the feeding sites and to fend off predators. Cows grow their antlers later in the spring, and they carry them all winter if they are pregnant. Otherwise, they too drop their antlers in the fall. By keeping their antlers over winter, pregnant cows have an advantage in competition for food or for fighting wolves. Rivers are no obstacle to their migration, as caribou are amazing swimmers thanks to their buoyant, hollow hair and wide hooves. Adults are known to swim as fast as 10 kilometers per hour, but even newly born calves have no problem crossing rivers. Once at the river's edge, the caribou entered the frigid, fast-flowing water and started to cross. However, once halfway across, the skittish lead caribou decided to turn around and swim back to the shore. Herd mentality ruled, so the other caribou followed suit, and soon they were moving away from the river and climbing back up to the top of the bench.
They're turning around and going back.
After a quarter of an hour, the caribou reconsidered their decision and crossed the river, then rapidly crossed through the forest and passed out of sight over a mountain ridge.
Oh, there you can see them on the skyline now.
You can even see the rack.
Yes.
That's cool, you can see the rack even with the naked eye, eh? That's a pretty impressive rack.
And there they go.
From the mountaintop above the Red Hills campsite, we had an excellent view of the steeply sided Firth River canyon within the broad, relatively flat valley bottom. The river's ancient channels were visible adjacent to the canyon. These paleo channels suggest that the ancestral Firth River once exhibited a braided channel pattern prior to carving out the canyon. While having lunch, we could look at the beautiful alpine plants. The mountaintop was studded with fantastically shaped tors. Tors are outcrops of bedrock that have resisted erosion more than the surrounding rock. From the tors, we had a grand view out over the British mountains, which were alive with wildlife when one looked closely. Surveying the British mountains, we could see a group of sheep grazing in their summer range high up an alpine valley. Seeing the sheep up the valley wasn't unusual, but what was the sight of a large grizzly climbing up the valley towards them. The grizzly easily climbed up and crossed a large snowfield. As the sheep could see the grizzly, they weren't overly concerned and just moved out of the bear's reach. We were fortunate to get a close-up view of the beautiful Dall sheep in the British mountains. As the summer solstice is about 3 a.m. on the Firth River, I wanted to get up and see how much light there'd be. With the sky bright enough to easily see the campsite and the frigid Firth River, I noticed a caribou calf bobbing through the serious rapids, but soon her mother appeared to sort out the situation. Meanwhile, on the far bank, the remaining 13 from the group of caribou was dithering about whether to cross the rapids or not. Finally, the 13 laggards decided to give it a go, and they entered the rapids, crossed the Firth River, and exited the river in the midst of our campsite. After collecting themselves on the shore of our camp, they soon darted off into the trees, clicking their hooves like tap dancers and disappearing into the enveloping forest. This summer solstice encounter with the caribou swimming across the frigid Firth River was the highlight of my raft trip down that Arctic river. Leaving Wolf Tor's campsite, we traversed another stretch of exciting rapids, some of which required us to don a helmet, before we finally reached Laorir Camp, our next stop.
Holy shit, that was
Got that on the all sector.
look what he caught.
Higher than medium.
A beautiful white Dall sheep was espied high up a vertiginous cliff face. However, the sheep seemed nonplussed despite the drop below. While our rain suits protected us from getting drenched, the frigid river water hitting the suit was very cold. We passed by a monolith nicknamed Trudeau's Finger in memory of the Canadian Prime Minister who arrogantly flipped off protesting voters. Above our camp, which was nestled in a canyon, there was a beautiful tundra plain that had been used by ancient peoples when hunting caribou. Ivavik National Park is one of the few places in Canada that completely escape the effects of glaciation. Hence, the mountain valleys found here are generally V-shaped, having been formed by water erosion, vice the U-shape typical of glaciated valleys. On the plain was the remains of an ancient caribou fence, once used in the hunting of caribou. The fence was erected in the path of the migrating herd. Surprisingly, the minimalist fence served to redirect the animals to where the hunters were waiting, or into a corral. Near the fence was an ancient tent ring that once helped anchor down an animal skin tent. Apart from caribou, the plain hosted beautiful Arctic flowers and fascinating butterflies. Arctic butterflies are adapted to living in Arctic conditions. They overwinter as caterpillars, and in the harsh cold environment, it can take them 2 years to develop from an egg to an adult. Given the near absence of bees, other insects served as pollinators. In the morning, patience was required until the sun climbed above the canyon walls and shone directly on the camp. The rays of the sun felt glorious when they finally arrived. The tundra plain looked beautiful in the morning with the clouds shrouding the mountains in the background. In part 3, we complete our raft trip to the icy Arctic Ocean. Along the way, we see grizzlies, caribou, red foxes, and drag our rafts across the Firth Lagoon.
Take me somewhere nice, to some tired island in your heart called paradise.
If you enjoyed this film, please subscribe and like. There are many more similar films available on my channel.